Hello and welcome. I'm going to draw a little bit from Samuel Putnam's 400 Years of Free Thought. Now, just to give you an idea of what free thought is about, I'm going to draw from Kingsley's article, American Free Thought, From Paine to Haldeman Julius. And this was published in 2019 in the Midwest Quarterly. And he tells us that free thought emphasizes the absolute separation of church and state. Well, I don't know about all of that. From what I've been reading in Putnam's volume, it differs, but this part does not differ. And that is that free thought followed a doctrine of rational logic evolved through inquiry for the purpose of seeking truth. And that, well, that's our purpose, essentially, aside from all these other purposes that we have in life, but is to seek truth, to evaluate what is true, to test it. And then when we become satisfied that it is true, we incorporate it into our beliefs. And in this particular portion of Samuel Putnam's 400 Years of Free Thought, and this was published in 1894, they're discussing infinite, and not just the word, because in the various writings, deity, God, everything else also uses the terms the infinite, the absolute infinite, and so on. So he's explaining to us that the infinite is cognizable, but not conceivable. It can be known by a sinking back into identity with the infinite absolute, but it is incomprehensible by consciousness and reflection, which are only of the relative and different. Now, we might interpret this as the infinite, of which the term God often refers to, may be recognized, but it does not mean that it is understood. We cannot understand something that we cannot conceive, and God is essentially something we can have problems conceiving, which is why it drives so many people mad. When comparing the concept of infinite with nature, we can readily see that all of nature grows and decays, and that through decay, all is renewed. Hence, birth, death, rebirth, death, reborn. You see, it's a cycle. Nature is all about cycles. And even in many of the religious texts, the spirit teachings that have come through many of the trance mediums and such, it still alludes to this idea of birth and death. We are born into the physical realm, we die in the physical realm, and we are born into what we call the spiritual realm. We die in the spiritual realm, and we are born into the physical realm. And it is this transition from physical to spiritual and spiritual to physical that is often referred to as, by spirit teachings, the passage, because that's what it is, a passage. And we're not going to go into that right now, but what we are talking about is that to comprehend a being that does not grow, nor does it decay, is enough to cause the mind to become unbalanced, mad. In ancient times, in prehistoric times, such people were referred to as shaman. or shaman if you prefer. Therefore, if we choose to recognize deity through nature, and that nature is the expression of deity, the mind can easily comprehend a being that is in continual rebirth, because the self is in continual rebirth. You are in continual rebirth. And this occurs through the shedding of habits, thoughts, behaviors, etc., that no longer serve us. And in this way, God is conceivable. The absolute is conceivable. Only through comparison is God conceivable. We have to have something to measure everything by. This is what we are. We compare the physical realm with the spiritual realm. We say God is spirit, therefore, God has to have moved through the physical realm and back into the spiritual realm if we follow this natural logic. And only through comparison is God conceivable, which is why we liken God to something. How is it written in Genesis? We shall make man in our image, the image of God. Infinite does not and cannot mean ongoing. It can only mean beyond conception, beyond measure, beyond comprehension. Therefore, God, the infinite, the absolute, are abstractions in themselves. And because they are inconceivable, they are accepted without question to the mind that is bound by sensual reality, meaning that it is acceptable by those who cannot move beyond the surface, who cannot look deeper into the writings, who cannot look deeper into nature, who cannot look deeper into themselves. And consider this. Can we imagine time as unconditionally unlimited? We can talk about it, but can you see it? We cannot conceive the infinite regress of time because, well, let's face it, with today's science, you go back far enough, you end up in the future. If you go far enough into the future, you end up in the past. May not make sense to some people, makes perfect sense to me, because when I gaze upon nature, I see everything working in a cycle. Everything in nature is a cycle. Well, now, winter, spring, summer, fall, winter, spring. There we go. This is a cycle. Growth, maturity, decay, death, birth. There's that transition. We cannot conceive the infinite regress of time, for such a notion could only be realized by the infinite addition and thought of finite times. And such an addition would in itself require an eternity for its accomplishment. Well, now, what this is suggesting is that we cannot fathom the infinite without first comparing it to the finite. Thus, all that is representative of the inconceivable infinite begins with the finite, or all that remains inconceivable begins with the conceivable. Makes sense? Yes? Everything that we have right now is built upon something else. Today's technology was built upon yesterday's technology. Today's streamlined designs are based upon yesterday's streamlined designs, which are now considered inadequate. See? See what's happening here? That which is referred to as the infinite, absolute, God, etc., begins with what is known. And in this case, begins with, well, your belief begins with you. What you are begins with you, and you are based on something else, father and mother. And they, each of them, are based on something else. Everything is based on something else. It makes sense. We begin with what is known and we move into what is unknown, and then what is unknown becomes known. God is compared to us, to humankind. Because of this, we are the image of God. Just look at Genesis. Let us create man in our image. We are the image of God. Therefore, we are based on something that existed beforehand. Whether you go along with the idea of evolving from something lesser species into a better species, or if you subscribe to the idea that we were placed here fully formed, doesn't make a difference. Makes absolutely no difference. Everything that exists right now was based on something that existed beforehand. Call it new and improved, and because it cannot continuously improve, it must decay, and because it decays or because it breaks down, something new comes along. You buy a TV, it stops working, it breaks down, you go out and buy another one, and the one that you bought was based on the one that you had. It's an obvious cycle there, an obvious cycle. God is compared to us, to humankind, and because of this, we are the image of God and are of God and contain God within ourselves. Therefore, when we strike another, we truly are striking God. Just a little something to consider. If it's too much, hey, throw it away. Don't pay any attention to it. But if something about it makes sense, then you have an obligation to explore it even further. Thank you very much for visiting and allowing me to share this with you.